Hello everyone and welcome to another video on my channel. My name is Mark Lambert. I'm recording a video. It's Christmas time, 29th of December, and loads has been going on. So there's been a plethora. It's been hard to keep up with it all. And one of the things that there's a number of things I think it's very worth talking about. But one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about today was this guy, Peter Seewald is his name, and he's a German journalist, quite a famous guy who was the editor of Die Spiegel, which is one of the big German publications. He left the church actually in the 70s, and he did an interview with Pope Benedict XVI, which brought him back to the church eventually. So this is a guy who knows Pope Benedict really, really well, and he's given this interview to Daily Compass, which you can see here, hopefully. Okay, in which he's quite interestingly says basically that Pope Francis wants to erase Benedict XVI's legacy. And I think this is a really interesting point. As you might have noticed from a number of my videos, the big thing about Pope Francis is that he's been justifying the sort of progressive direction that he's taken in his papacy by saying that it's the legacy of Vatican II. And I strongly disagree with that. In fact, I think it's very obvious, it's been very obvious from the beginning that what he's doing is contradicting Vatican II, rolling back Vatican II. And I don't know, I'm unsure whether that's because he doesn't understand it, what he's doing. He thinks Vatican II is about something that it's not about, or whether it's a deliberate smokescreen, the Vatican II stuff, to just sort of push through any progressive agenda that you want. And we've seen that a lot in the church over the last 50 years or so, haven't we? That Vatican II, what's commonly referred to as the spirit of Vatican II, is the way that a lot of people sort of push forward whatever agenda they want to push forward, unfortunately. And it is heartbreaking that that's the case. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of people haven't read the documents of Vatican II. They don't really understand what Vatican II is about, and they just see it as a huge change in the church's praxis from before the council and after the council. And a lot of the work of John Paul II and Benedict XVI was correcting a lot of that error. There were a lot of people who after Vatican II just decided to go their own way. And what's really been interesting over the course of the 10 years of Pope Francis's pontificate is that he has promoted a lot of those people to high office, and people who are sympathetic with their aims. There was a really interesting article that came out recently about one of these guys, a guy called Charles Curran, who was actually suspended from teaching Catholic theology because he was so at odds with the Catholic position, was basically just teaching against the Catholic position. And there was a big hoo-ha about it. You can still find the letter that was written by the CDF to him. Obviously, it wasn't one letter. There was a long dialogue where the CDF was trying to get him to rescind his position or understand the errors about what he was teaching. But he refused to do that and was eventually sort of banned from being a Catholic theologian. So, and I think with his recent document on theology, that a lot of that is to do with that. But you see Pope Francis adopting these pre-Vatican II positions, Bernard Haring's position, fundamental option, a lot of the sexual sort of positions that you see from people like Charles Curran. And that, for me, is really interesting. I don't want to go on too long about it before we get into the document. It's into this article. But there's a lot of connections if you know a little bit of church history. For example, the cardinal in the UK, Vincent Nichols, he was someone who he basically was the rector of the Upholland Northern Institute, and he invited Charles Curran to be a speaker while he was the rector. So Cardinal Nichols has always pushed this sort of theology, but we can see him pushing back against it now. So that's very interesting. But you can see how a lot of the cardinals would have been, a lot of the bishops would have been on board with some of the stuff that Francis talks about. But seeing it in action now in the church, they might be deciding to go in a different direction. And what we're seeing come out now is lots of people are reacting very strongly to Fiducia Supplicans, his document, his declaration, let's not forget, on blessing irregular relationships and gay couples. So let's have a little look at what Peter Seewald has to say. He starts off: gay couples, Latin Mass, sexual abuse, purging of the men most closely associated with Benedict, the appointment of Fernandez. Pope Francis has done everything he could to destroy what his predecessor had built. 1 year after the death of Benedict XVI, his biographer and friend Peter Seewald speaks out. So this is someone who really knows Pope Benedict XVI, and I think it's worth reading through this because it gives us some real insight into the Pope Emeritus as he was. Now we can call him the Pope because he's gone to his eternal reward. It gives us some of us might feel sad or upset that he didn't speak out against Pope Francis and sort of gave his tacit approval. But I think this gives us some real insight into why that would be. And we've seen that, I think, with Jörg Ganswein, who also has been very quiet, very meek. He has said some things, but he recently did an interview with EWTN, and I didn't even bother doing a video on it because I thought that was going to be really interesting. But having watched it, he was very gentle and delicate, and I think that respects Pope Benedict XVI. I think that respects Joseph Ratzinger. So, and I think this will give us some insight into why that is. So let's have a little run through this now. Joseph, so this is an Italian guy who's written this. A priest sent this article to me because of it, which is also interesting. But this is so you'll notice that the language, I'm just going to read it out and then comment on it, but you'll notice that the language is very Italian. The way they write newspaper articles and commentary is sometimes a bit like opera, so bear with. So it starts off: Joseph Aloysius Ratzinger would have been a figure to be remembered in the history of the Church, even if he had not been elected to the papal throne. In 2005, however, the Lord called one of the greatest living theologians, the man to whom St. John Paul II entrusted the custody of the Catholic orthodoxy for 23 years, to become Pope. Benedict XVI's pontificate ended traumatically more than a decade ago, as his earthly life ended a year ago, depriving the precincts of St. Peter's of that service of prayer promised at his last general audience on the 27th of February 2013. Also, in light of the new season under the banner of acclaimed discontinuity at the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, what has become of Ratzinger's legacy in the current pontificate? This is a question the Daily Compass asked Peter Seewald, a German journalist, friend and biographer of Benedict XVI, with whom he has written 4 interview books. Question: is it fair to say that the relationship between Benedict XVI and Francis was very close, as Francis recently declared? Seewald answers: good question. We all remember the warm words that Cardinal Ratzinger spoke at the Requiem for John Paul II, words that touched the heart, that spoke of Christian love, of respect. But no one remembers Bergoglio's words at the Requiem for Benedict XVI. They were as cold as the whole ceremony, which had to be rather brief so as not to honour his predecessor too much. At least that was my impression. It's a bit harsh. And our journalist friend says, your judgment is harsh. I mean, how does one manifest friendship? With a mere statement in words or by living it? The differences between Benedict XVI and his successor were great from the start, in temperament, culture, intellect, and above all in the direction of the pontificates. In the beginning, Benedict did not know much about Bergoglio, except that as Bishop in Argentina, he was known for his authoritarian leadership. He promised his successor obedience. Francis obviously regarded it as a kind of blank check. Even his predecessor remained silent so as not to give the slightest impression of wanting to interfere in his successor's governance. Benedict trusted Francis, but he was bitterly disappointed several times. That's an interesting insight in itself, isn't it? What do you mean by this? Bergoglio continued to write nice letters to the Pope Emeritus after his election. He knew he could not hold a candle to this great and noble spirit. He also repeatedly spoke of the gifts of his predecessor, calling him a great pope whose legacy will become more evident from generation to generation. But if one really speaks of a great pope out of conviction, shouldn't one do everything possible to cultivate his legacy, just as Benedict XVI did with regards to John Paul II? As we can see today, Pope Francis has done very little indeed to remain in continuity with his predecessors. And that's a key phrase there, continuity, because, Pope Francis, Pope Benedict's big thing was the hermeneutic of continuity. So that there was continuity. He was trying to show that there was continuity with the teaching before the council and after, and address the main breaks, the ruptures that we've seen. And one of those, obviously, is the liturgy. There's and whatever your view is on that, you have to say that you could probably, the easiest way to understand the division in the church, which has been exacerbated so tragically by Traditionis Custodes, Promulga the Motu Proprio, promulgated by Pope Francis, banning the traditional form of the Mass. You have to say that the problem that we are definitely facing is one of reverence, that we have seen a decline in reverence for the Blessed Sacrament, and that has led to all kinds of abuses going on. It's also led to a loss of faith. And as a result of that, for example, in America, you've seen the Eucharistic Congress has been announced by the US Bishops' Conference, which is a wonderful initiative to try and renew reverence for the Blessed Sacrament, which is a really important thing. And I think this is most important in the liturgy, and that's one of the things that Pope Benedict XVI was trying to do. What does this mean in concrete terms? Bergoglio is not a European. And these are really interesting points. I think that we often, especially because we are Anglophiles, we're speaking English, or we're in the English-speaking world. And so, it's hard for us sometimes to understand the perspective of people outside of our continent. And it must be the same for Pope Francis as well. Remember, he doesn't speak hardly a word of English. He speaks Spanish and Italian. So, as Seawald says here, Bergoglio is not a European. He has little knowledge of our continent's culture. Above all, he seems to have an aversion to the westernized traditions of the Catholic Church. As a South American and a Jesuit, he has erased much of what was precious and dear to Ratzinger. Decisions were mostly made autocratically by a small circle of followers. Now, if Seawald doesn't know what was precious to Ratzinger, then no one does, I don't think so. This is really important. Suffice it to recall the ban on the Tridentine Mass. Benedict had built a small bridge to a largely forgotten treasure island, which until then had only been accessible through difficult terrain. It was a matter close to the German Pope's heart, and there was really no reason to tear down this bridge again. It was obviously a demonstration of the new power. The subsequent purge of staff completed the picture. Many people who supported Ratzinger's course and Catholic doctrine were guillotined. I think there's several reasons for Traditionis Custodes, a number of reasons. And one of them is the fact that it was increasingly difficult for Italian cardinal bishops to get vocations. All the vocations were going to the traditional orders. We've seen there's a massive contrast in the amount of vocations to traditional orders and to diocesan secular priesthood. The orders, thankfully, are picking up more vocations as well. But these are really interesting trajectory. And if you were looking for the signs of the Holy Spirit, as Pope Francis claims that he is, then, these are the things that it would seem obvious to me to be looking at. So that I think that's a really interesting pointer. The next question is, are you talking about the former prefect of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Gerhard Ludwig Müller, and the case of Monsignor Georg Ganswein? It was an unprecedented event in the history of the Church that Ganswein, the closest collaborator of a highly deserving pope, the greatest theologian ever to sit on the See of Peter. That is a fact, actually, that we haven't had as good a theologian as Ratzinger for hundreds of years as the Pope. So was thrown out of the Vatican in disgrace. He was not even given a word of pro forma thanks for his work. Of course, the purge primarily concerned the man whose lineage Gunswine represents, Pope Benedict XVI. More recently, it was US Bishop Strickland, Benedict's friend and a critic of Bergoglio, who was removed from office on the pretext of financial misconduct, an obviously implausible reason. And that's been demonstrated. There was no, I don't even know if that's accurate actually from Seawald, because I'm not sure that that there was a reason given. Something was mentioned in the press that, and I think it was basically a supposition that if he was removed, then they would have to manufacture some financial reason for removing him. But in the end, there was no reason given at all. So, and when a Ratzinger supporter like 75-year-old Cardinal Burke is deprived overnight of his home and salary without any explanation, it's difficult to recognise the Christian fraternity in all of this. You mentioned the lack of continuity. I mean, these are just a few cases, but there are a lot more. You know, it gets hard to remember all the extraordinary things that have happened. But obviously, Seawald has brought those recent things up there. And interestingly, today, Cardinal Burke actually met with Pope Francis, which is really interesting and perhaps a sign that the backlash over Fiducia Supplicans is being felt even more keenly than we perhaps imagined. Perhaps this is the work that he's doing to try and recover the position. I'm not sure that any of us won't see through it, though. Okay, you mentioned the lack of continuity. Do you think a document like Fiducia Supplicans would have been published if Benedict XVI had still been alive? Good question. In his small monastery in the centre of the Vatican, the elderly Pope Emeritus acted like a light on the mountain. The Italian philosopher Giorgio Agamben also sees it as a cacheton, a restraint based on the Apostle Paul's second letter to the Thessalonians. The term catechon is also interpreted as, forgive me, my ancient Greek isn't what it should be, for something or someone stands in the way of the end times. According to Agamben, Ratzinger, as a young theologian in an interpretation of St. Augustine, distinguished between a church of the wicked and a church of the righteous. From the beginning, the church was inextricably mixed. It is both the church of Christ and the church of the Antichrist. From this point of view, Benedict's resignation inevitably led to the separation of the good church from the black church, the separation of the wheat and the chaff. However, Hong Kong's Cardinal Joseph Zen recently pointed out that Benedict himself had repeatedly warned of the danger of doctrinal landslide. When I asked Pope Benedict why he could not die, he replied that he had to stay as a kind of memorial to the authentic message of Christ. Wow, isn't that interesting? And it makes a lot of sense as well. Something just popped into my head there. It was a quote from Pope Benedict XVI's book, An Introduction to Christianity. So let me see if I can quickly find it for you, because I think it makes sense in this context. Just bear with me a second. Just talk among yourselves. Sure, I've got it here somewhere. That's after that. No, I can't find it. Okay. That's good, isn't it? It kept you waiting, and then the extent to which heteropraxis is resisted by faithful Catholics. No, that's not it. That's Cardinal Muller. Oh, I feel like I've got to find it now. I should have got this. It just popped into my head, which is... No, I can't find it. I'm so sorry. Okay. Oh, hang on. Is that it? Here we go. Got it. Yes, okay, I've got it. Right, sorry, thanks for your patience there. The aspect of Christ's holiness that upsets his contemporaries was that fire did not fall on the unworthy, nor were the zealous allowed to pull up the weeds which they saw growing luxuriantly on all sides. On the contrary, his holiness expressed itself precisely as a mingling with the sinners whom Jesus drew into his vicinity, as a mingling to the point where he said he himself was made to be sin, 2 Corinthians 5:21, and bore the curse of the law in execution as a criminal, complete community of fate with the lost. Cf. 2 Corinthians 5:21, Galatians 3:13. He has drawn sin to himself, made it his lot, and so revealed what true holiness is, not separation but union, not judgment but redeeming love. Is the church not simply the continuation of Jesus' habit of sitting at table with sinners, of his mingling with the misery of sin to the point where he actually seems to sink under its weight? That's interesting, isn't it, that particular bit? Is there not revealed in the unholy holiness of the church, as opposed to man's expectation of purity, God's true holiness, which is love, love which does not keep its distance in a sort of aristocratic, untouchable purity, but mixes with the dirt of this world in order to thus overcome it? That's Introduction to Christianity, page 264 to 265. Now, this is a really big thing that I feel I've been learning over the last few years of this papacy. And that is that, to understand that the church, the wheat and the tares analogy that Jesus uses in the gospel, but to understand that in order to show man true power, Jesus acts in a radical way, and shows us his love in a radical way. And that's a way that exists with us in our brokenness. And I think if you've watched some stuff that I've done previously, you might have heard me say that when I was in Lourdes in the summer, I was very privileged to be in Lourdes in France. And it felt like that. It felt like God was bringing all of his broken, that it's no good if we think we're pure, if we think that we're without sin. It's not. We can't do that on our own. Part of the whole gospel thing is that we recognise that we can't do that, and so we fall on our knees before the cross and we ask Jesus for help. And that's what we're constantly. That is the work in progress. Is us constantly working on that. So I think that we long for holiness, in the church. We're shocked and scandalised when we find that there's bad behaviour and broken behaviour going on. But really we shouldn't be, because you have to remember that the church, like in ecclesiology, you've got the holiness of the church and the worldliness of the church, the horizontal of the worldliness of the church. It always contains sinners. It's always just men and women, obviously, but it's just human beings. And they're broken and they're going to fail and they're going to let you down. But it's the vertical dimension which reaches up to heaven and the sanctified hope of holiness that we all have. So that's what we're working on ourselves. So I thought that was beautiful, and it gives us a little insight into the way that Pope Benedict saw this, that, how faithful was he that he was able to sit there and to recognise that this was all part of God's plan. And that he recognised all the time that within the church, and who better as the head of the CDF for all those years, he knew all the brokenness that was out there. So he was truly a holy man. Thanks be to God. What a great man he was. Okay, so the next thing. What are the most critical aspects of Fiducia Supplicans? In his speeches, Pope Francis says many right things, but a pastor, as the Latin Patriarch of Jerusalem, Cardinal Pier Battista Pizzaballa, presumably a genuine candidate for the next conclave, good catch there, Seaald, I would say that he is, recently clarified, should on the one hand listen to the flock, but on the other hand also lead, offer a guidance and say where they should go. Pizzaballa said, one must not make oneself dependent on the expectations of others. The problems with Francis in the past has been that he's failed to keep many of his promises, sometimes saying white, sometimes saying black, making ambiguous statements, contradicting himself repeatedly and causing considerable confusion. Right at the beginning of all this, I was calling him the Pope of Confusion because it was the contradictory positions that just worried me the most very early on. I love that from Pizzaballa, because one of my big criticisms of Pope Francis is that he's trying to be like everyone's parish priest, but we need him to be Pope, not parish priest. So he needs to get on with the job of governance and stop interfering in parish life. In Traditionis Custodes, he's clarified that we're not even allowed to advertise the traditional Latin Mass in our parish bulletins. I mean, how much more autocratic could you get for the Pope of collegiality and synodality? It's just counterintuitive, isn't it? In the case of a document like Fiducia Supplicans, which can be interpreted in so many different ways, there's also the fact that what has just been considered correct is suddenly declared wrong without much of a decision maturation process. Not to mention the divisive effect this has on the Church and the absolute disastrous timing of its publication. We've got to give a round of applause for that, haven't you? The big issue before Christmas was not the commemoration of Christ's birth, but the apparently much more important blessing of same-sex couples by the Church. The media, far from the Church, were enthusiastic about it, and no one thought about the fact that such an important document was not, as was customary under Pope Benedict XVI, discussed and approved by the plenary assembly of the Congregation of the Doctrine of Faith, but was simply decreed autocratically. And it's the autocratic nature of Pope Francis, the lack of humility for the office, that what were they thinking, that they could promulgate this document? It's such a high-level document as well, a declaration. The last declaration issued by the then Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith was Dominus Jesus, which was a clarification on Ex Ecclesia Nulla Salens. I mean, this is a different gravy altogether. And if you read the document, as I've done, like I've read through the document with you in another video, you can have a look. One of the things that I pointed out was right at the beginning, it's got this thing where it's trying to sort of prove its own credentials. And here you've got Seawald saying plainly that it wasn't approved by the plenary assembly of the CDF. So what are they doing? It's just arbitrary, autocratic, and the timing was absolutely appalling, wasn't it? I think we can all agree that we've been all caught up with this, and just none of this seems Catholic to me. The lack of sensitivity, the lack of thought, the fact that there's no continuity. It's like Fernandez thinks he can pull the wool over everyone's eyes with a sort of bait and switch move. He's playing the old cup game with things like unions. You've got the main issues in Fiducia Supplicans are this thing about couples and unions, which is completely unclear. The fact that he starts a whole new theology of blessings, which is absolute nonsense. I mean, the whole thing's a car crash, if you ask me. Right, where were we? In your opinion, would Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, author of the Declaration, have been appointed head of the dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, even if Benedict XVI had remained alive? This is a brilliant bit, right? Difficult to say. Francis and his circle, difficult to say. It's not really difficult to say, as he goes on to say. Francis and his circle could assume that although the emeritus was faithful to his promise of obedience, he would no longer remain silent if the level of destruction of the church, which God apparently allowed, became unbearable. Immediately after his death, considerations that were still valid during his lifetime were abandoned. It became right that a man like Victor Manuel Fernandez, who was quickly given a cardinal's hat, should be appointed to the post of prefect for the Doctrine of the Faith. The Argentinian is not qualified for this important task? Yes, he's not. He's got no qualifications that would allow him to be in this role in such a high office. He's been promoted beyond his ability, except for one thing. He is the protégé of an Argentinian pope, and that is all it's down to. Until now, aptitude was the main criterion for these appointments, but under Bergoglio, it seems that loyalty to the line counts, like a South American dictator, I'm afraid. Even before taking office, Fernandez had announced a kind of self-demonization of the Catholic Church, yes. He wanted to change the catechism, relativize biblical statements, and question celibacy. He knew he would not have much time left. He realized that he would not be able to stay with any subsequent pope. That's a telling statement, isn't it? He was in a hurry, so he immediately raised his leader's attitude towards the new doctrine. One speaks then of an expanded understanding of things. This is the door to be able to legitimize previously unknown interpretations of the Catholic faith. That is the thing, right? It's like all this thing about loyalty to the Pope, right? Which I totally understand, because it's the fundamental Catholic position is loyalty to the Pope. But we are talking about what Seawald has pointed out here, that what we've got is the legitimization of previously unknown interpretations of the Catholic faith. And in Fiducia Supplicans, for example, there is no theological explanation for that development of doctrine. It's just like Acorn, as Catherine Bennett said in a recent Catholic Herald article, Lamborghini, Acorn, Lamborghini. And that is not the development of doctrine. It just doesn't work that way, as anyone with any theological nous understands. This is not overly complex doctrine. So is he expecting to just pull the wool over the eyes of all of us? Or what about all the priests and all the bishops and all that sort of thing? How is he going to get away with it? How's he got the hubris to attempt to do that? This is what really interests me about it. And this is why I think it hurts me so much, because I believed that it was impossible. I really did, that we would get to this position where you had the Pope doing outlandish things, making outlandish appointments, scandalous decisions and pronouncements. Abu Dhabi, for example, on the plane, all the scandalous things he said against the faithful on the plane, let alone Fiducia Supplicans or any. It's just nonsense theology, and it's not in continuity with the magisterium. And I really didn't think it'd get this bad, but it seems like the cardinals and bishops are just happy to say, oh, well, we'll just bury our heads in the sand and wait for him to die. Well, I don't know that really is good enough. And thank God, I think it's down to us, as Fulton Sheen, Archbishop Fulton Sheen said, the laity have to stand up and say, no, I'm sorry, we're not accepting this. And if you wanted to know what the sensus fidei is, that is the sensus fidei. So we're out here making our voices known. And if you agree, then please do make sure you like this video and share it about, so that the information can get out to more people and we can all comfort each other and affirm each other. So we're not going crazy. This is really happening. In the future, the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith will no longer be needed as a watchdog office for the true Catholic faith, Francis explained, but as a promoter of the charisma of theologians. Nobody knows what this actually means. Reality is always more important than the idea, he added. Put simply, what is important is not what the council, for example, said about the faith, but what is asked. At the same time, Francis softened John Paul II's article on the organisation of the dicastery, which concerned the protection of the truth of the faith and the integrity of morals. Above all, Fernandez should take into account the most recent magisterium in his interpretations, namely that of his Argentine mentor. It seemed a quid pro quo that the Pope exempted the new prefect for the doctrine of the faith from having to deal with sexual abuse in the church. Ratzinger, his predecessor in the post, had, however, brought this area under authority because he saw that elsewhere crimes were swept under the carpet and victims left alone. This is an interesting juxtaposition here. However, Fernandez is no stranger to this topic. The Argentine daily, don't ask me to pronounce that, you can see it there, La Izquierda Diario, reported that as Archbishop of La Plata, he had covered up at least 11 cases of sexual abuse by priests in various forms. He's now running the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith. Next question. Another proof of discontinuity was the repeal of the liberalisation of celebrations in the extraordinary form of the Roman Rite in the letter to bishops accompanying with the publication of Traditiones Custodes. Francis said that the intention of Summorum Pontificum had been often gravely disregarded. Has Benedict XVI really failed so badly with the so-called Latin Mass? On the contrary, Ratzinger wanted to pacify the Church. Exactly, he put out the liturgy wars, and Francis has reignited it, without questioning the validity of the Mass according to the 1969 Roman Missal. The way we treat the liturgy, explained, determines the destiny of the faith and the Church. Amen. Francis, on the other hand, described the traditional forms as a nostalgic disease. If the intention had been, could he be more insulting in any of this stuff? If the intention had been gravely disregarded, it would have been appropriate, firstly, to obtain an option from Benedict XVI, and secondly, to justify this accusation. But there is no investigation into this, let alone any documentation of the alleged cases. And the claim that the majority of bishops voted in favour of repealing Benedict's Summorum Pontificum in a worldwide poll is just patently not true, exactly, according to my information. What I find particularly, and you can see by the number of bishops who've implemented it, apart from anything else, what I find particularly shameful is that the Pope Emeritus is not even informed of this act, but had to learn about it from the press. He has been stabbed in the heart. God love him. That is terrible, isn't it? First, he spoke of abuse. You, who reconstructed the facts of Father Peter H's case in the biography Benedict XVI, The Life, can you explain why Monsignor Batzing, massive heretic in Germany, was wrong when he asked Ratzinger to apologise for his handling of the abuse as Archbishop of Munich? The president, so this is great because we're getting a German perspective on this German thing, right? And Batzing is the president of the German Bishops' Conference. Batzing knows that no one else in the Catholic Church has taken such decisive steps in the fight against sexual abuse as the prefect for the faith and the Pope. Italian journalist Gianluigi Nuzzi said that Benedict has removed the cloak of silence and forced his church to focus on the victims. He has done much more than Pope Francis against this scandalous evil. Bishop Batzing's claim that the Pope Emeritus did not apologise for what was done to the victims with the transfer of an abuser is pure misinformation. One thing is certain, in his statement of the 6th of February 2022, following the discussion of the much-discussed Munich report, Pope Emeritus made it clear that he could only express once again my deep shame, my great sorrow, my sincere apology to all victims of sexual abuse. He has assumed a great responsibility in the Catholic Church. My sorrow is even greater for the crimes and errors that have occurred during my tenure and in the places concerned. The victims of sexual abuse have my deepest sympathy, and I regret each and every case. With regard to the case of the priest Peter H. from Essen, dating back to the time when Ratzinger was Bishop of Munich, the team of legal advisors of the Pope Emeritus came to the conclusion that the former Bishop of Munich, as he himself stated, was neither aware that the priest was an abuser nor that he was used in pastoral care. The lawyers summarised that the report contains no evidence of an allegation of misconduct or assistance in cover-up. The documents unreservedly support Benedict XVI's statements. I put that one to bed, didn't it? You met him often, even after his resignation. Is it true that Benedict XVI had been very concerned in recent years about the situation in the German Church, and particularly about the consequences of the so-called synodal path? The synodal Weg is the way that it's termed in Germany. Ratzinger repeatedly expressed his concern, also as prefect for the doctrine of faith. In fact, he already felt offended after the Second Vatican Council when he criticised its watering down and reinterpretation. He accused the Catholic establishment in his country of displaying mostly busyness, self-promotion and boring debates on structural issues that completely miss the mission of the Catholic Church. Instead of a dynamic of faith, he said it is a huge mistake to think that it's enough to wear a different cloak to be loved and recognised by others again. Yeah, that's brilliant summation of what's going on in Germany. And I have to say, it seems like a lot of the machinations of the bishops here in the UK are about the same thing. I think there's a better mix in the USA. Christianity can only be a true partner in the difficult issues of modern civilization through its resolutely presented ethics. Unless we have a radical program for reform that we can offer to the world. We're not going to go, the message just falls flat and we rob the cross of its power. One of my regular themes, dear viewers. Okay. For Ratzinger, renewal consists in rediscovering the fundamental competencies of the Church. Reformation, he emphasised, means preserving in renewal, renewing in preservation. So that's the hermeneutic of continuity, to bring the witness of faith with new clarity into the darkness of the world. The search for what is contemporary must never lead to the abandonment of what is true and valid, and to adaptation to what is current. In this regard, he was sceptical of the elitist synodal path, whose practitioners are in no way legitimised by the people of the Church. Moreover, as he grew older, this development saddened him greatly. During one of our meetings, he had to ask himself how many dioceses in his country could still be called Catholics in terms of leadership. He was not resigned to this. He also saw the many youth initiatives that are rediscovering Catholicism and thus attracting more and more people, while on the contrary, those that claim to be particularly contemporary are not only experiencing increasing spiritual dryness, but also an impoverishment of personnel, not to mention a loss of members. By their fruits you will know them, dear viewer. It's the same as it always was. But even if the current situation of the Church and the world did not give cause for rejoicing, the Pope Emeritus always added in our conversations that he was deeply convinced in the end Christ will prevail. And Christ will prevail. So we must remember that. We must try and keep cool, keep the faith. I think one of the things that comes across from that really for me is the fact that it frightens me really that so many bishops have kept quiet about Fiducia Supplicans, and some have come out with absolutely disastrous responses. So one of them, which really sort of disappointed me, that came out really quickly, was this one, which is from Mark O'Toole, who is the Archbishop of Cardiff now. He was the Bishop of Plymouth, and he's recently been moved to be the Archbishop of Cardiff and also Bishop of Menevia in Wales. So he pretty quickly, came out with this statement, and I wanted to share it with you because I thought it was particularly bad. And I really sort of like Mark O'Toole. I've known him since before he was made a bishop, and he's always had great courage in promoting vocations and evangelization. So, but basically, this reads as, "Please, can I have a red hat? Please, can I have a red hat, Pope Francis? I love you and everything. I'll be your really good friend, and I always do what you tell me," instead of caring about his flock. There's nothing in it that calls out the problems. So it's treating us like idiots. That's what upsets me. And it does the damage because you lose trust for your bishop, because your bishop should be on watch for this stuff. And many of the bishops around the world have spoken out about it. And we should be able to rely on our bishops to say, hang on a minute, there's a problem here, instead of just putting it all through, no problem. So let's just quickly go through this. I warmly welcome the desire and intention of the Holy Father to encourage and challenge us to be close to all people, irrespective of their personal circumstances. When has the Church not tried to do that? The Declaration of Fiducia Supplicans issued yesterday by the Dicastery of the Doctrine of Faith is another example of this. At the heart of the Declaration is a call for those of us who are pastors to take a sensitive pastoral approach in being available and willing to draw close to people, whatever. But I mean, it's rubbish, because that's always been that. What church is not doing that? What pastor is not doing that? I don't know a single priest who is not in that position, who would always, reach out to people in whatever situation they're in. It's bizarre. The declaration indicates that it's now permissible for ordained ministers to join in the prayer of those persons who, although in a union that cannot be compared in any way to marriage, desire to entrust themselves to the Lord and his mercy, to invoke his help. Really? What a load of absolute rubbish. doublespeak, casuistry. It's pure casuistry, isn't it? Because our priests would always bless anyone, individual who came to them. But this is just a manipulation to allow the blessing of same-sex couples, which is, just against church teaching. And I don't want to go into a massive long rant about, but I've been talking to a couple of priests, and maybe I'll do a video that explains why church teaching is important. And that's not to say that we don't live in the reality where we get it wrong and we make mistakes, and some of us are struggling with the teaching and we're butting up against it, and we're living our lives in contradiction to that teaching sometimes. But the point is that the church is always calling us to the truth, and it's saying that that this might be the reality for you, but that reality is harming you in some way. So come and learn a better way to live and to love, and what love really means. And that's really what we need to be so desperately. The world is so desperate for it. And you see it all the time in the way that we commoditize sexuality, the way that it leads, these sort of things tend to lead into darker and darker circles. We've got to try and lift ourselves up and value the dignity of the family and of chaste relationships and relationships that are concerned with the dignity of the children, the responsibility of our the sexual gift. So that, anyway, I could go. That's a whole theology of the body thing. I'm not going to go into that, but So what else have we got here? At the same time, the Declaration remains firm in the traditional doctrine about the tradition of marriage, not allowing any type of liturgical rite or blessing similar to a liturgical rite that could create confusion. All these long sentences are sort of telltale, aren't they? But this is in keeping with what Pope Francis wrote in July. It's not, though. It's a direct contradiction of it. Read the document. Read the document, Archbishop Mark, because it says that we cannot bless. God cannot bless sin. That's basically what it says. So this is obviously, to anyone with any comprehension skills at all, a direct reversal of that earlier declaration. It was a responsa, sorry. So this is a declaration for Fiducia, if you want to be canon lawish about it, which I'm sure some people will be. The declaration is clear about this, highlighting that in order to avoid any form of confusion or scandal, the prayer of blessings is requested by a couple in an irregular situation, given that it's expressed outside the rites prescribed by the liturgical book. I mean, the problem here is that immediately Father James Martin, who is the Pope's best buddy, let's face it, has been put in as a Vatican media correspondent, promoted to high office by Pope Francis. There's all photo opportunities of him and Pope Francis. He writes letters to Pope Francis, which he puts on Twitter. He's got all these followers. He is directly promoting this. He rang up a married couple of men immediately, and he put it on Twitter, and he put it in the New York Times that the church is now blessing gay unions. And that there's this union and couples thing. It's all just smoke and mirrors, isn't it? None of that, and this has all been dealt with in the church before, and now we're confusing ourselves, let alone anyone else, by using all this language. This is not clear teaching from Archbishop Mark, and it's a real shame that he's come out of it. I think anyone reading it would say that this is just doublespeak. The declaration is clear about this, highlighting that in order to avoid any form of confusion or scandal, when the prayer of blessing is requested by a couple in an irregular situation, even though it is expressed outside of the rites prescribed by the liturgical books, this blessing should never be imparted in concurrence with the ceremonies of a civil union, and even in connection with them, nor can it be performed with any clothing. What a load of rubbish. It's more concerned with what the people are wearing than by what is actually going on. And, we know from reading through the document that basically there's an instruction in there to the priest to say, don't ask and don't tell, and that's how you get away with it in your conscience. What? Oh, it's so bad. It's so bad. I invite all in the Archdiocese of Cardiff and the Diocese of Menevia to read and reflect on Fiducia Supplicans carefully, so that they're aware of the parameters on which the clergy may impart a blessing to others who seek it from them. Such blessings should not take place within the liturgical sacrament or life of the parish, but in other contexts such as visit to a shrine, a meeting with a priest, a prayer recited in a group, or during a pilgrimage. Indeed, during these blessings are not given through the ritual forms proper to the liturgy, but as an impression. Oh, so boring. Who's going to read that and take a orthodox perspective on? Oh, it's so depressing, isn't it? Oh dear. Anyway, right. So that's that one. By contrast, in a way, I'll show you. I wonder if I can show you. So this is the Cardinal Archbishop, right? So can you see up there? It says Archbishop's House, Westminster, London. So this was on the 21st of December. Let me just check that that's come up. Yes, no problem. Dear fathers and brothers, I'm glad to have this opportunity to wish you a very happy Christmas in your service of the people, but also you will also have heard. Oh, a minute, now it's not going down. Why is it not going down? Oh, you want to see that? We're going to have to just. So the important bit here is this bit at the bottom. The declaration is clear that such moments of prayer and blessings are to be spontaneous and never part of a ritual or liturgical act. No set formula of prayers and blessings envisaged to be provided. In this way, it is to remain clear that such moments of prayer and blessings are quite different from blessings of the union or partnership itself. I mean, basically, the Cardinal Archbishop there is saying to his priests, we can't bless gay couples. So, although it's playing the political game, it is better. It's done better than Archbishop O'Toole's. Okay, so that's me for today. That is 50 minutes, actually. Not too bad. I might have to do a little edit there when I went off to look for that quote and cut out the 5-6 minutes of silence while I look for it. But listen, happy Christmas to everyone. And I wish you all Happy New Year. I've got another video to do. I'll try and get that out in the next couple of days. But I really appreciate you tuning in and joining me for these deep dives into what's going on in the church using various documents. If you've got any questions, please do leave a comment underneath and I'll try and get round to sorting you out. I'll put a link to the article that I've reviewed from the New Daily Compass in the notes. Please do like and share. Obviously, as you know, I'm part of Catholic Unscripted with Catherine and Gavin. Please do check out our website, catholicunscripted.something or other. I can never remember what it is. But if you go to Catholic Unscripted, please do subscribe to our YouTube channel there and you can find all the details on our videos. So get involved. God bless you all. I wish you a really happy and holy what's left of Christmas and a great New Year. God bless.